he had this big villa where girls in bikinis were lounging around. A girl would bring him a telex about some deal. He would say yes or no, and she would go away to carry out his orders. It was like something out of a Harold Robbins novel. I only managed to spend one day with him because he left the next morning by private plane to visit the Shah of Persia. Imagine a world where money was no object, where a man's ambition knew no bounds, and where risk-taking became a way of life, making billions, cornering global markets, dodging the law, meetings with presidents and monarchs, creating entire national industries, and outsmarting the world's most powerful nations, all while keeping a low profile. From billionaire oil dealer and royal advisor to convicted criminal all in one lifetime, this is the extraordinary story of one of the most interesting men you have probably never heard of, Johannes Christian Martinus Augustinus Maria John Deuss. With a name like his, it would not be hard to fathom that he may have had a god complex. However, his path to power began quite humbly. John Deuss was born in Rotterdam in 1942 to a father who owned a small car repair shop. Deuss's first business was a car dealership that eventually went bust. At some point, he realized that trading the fuel for the vehicles was a much better business than selling the vehicles themselves. In his early 20s, he began to do just that and started to have much more success. Like most, he started by brokering small deals and buying and selling small amounts until he struck gold with his first big deal, brokering a cargo of Egyptian kerosene for a company in Rotterdam. By the late 1960s, he founded J.O.C. John's own company, putting together capital of $300,000 and incorporating it in Bermuda. A few years later, in the early 70s, he founded the company that would make him a powerhouse, Trans World Oil. The 70s were a perfect time to enter the oil trade. The Arab oil embargo and the subsequent rise of OPEC had unseated the oligopoly of the Seven Sisters of Oil, a group of 7 major companies from the US and UK that had been controlling the global oil industry for decades. National oil producers were no longer locked into long-term contracts with the Seven Sisters, and they were now ready to make deals on the open spot trading market, where oil was bought and purchased on the spot. This is where Deuss made his fortune. In a clever and bold move, he used the money he had earned in trading oil to establish his own bank in Bermuda, First Curaçao International Bank, FCIB, which would later become notorious. More on that later in the video. One of the hallmarks of John Deuss's success was his ability to circumvent sanctions and make deals between strange bedfellows. In 1974, at the height of the Cold War, he was able to make one of these signature deals. He began importing and selling Soviet oil into the United States. You will probably never see this one in your history textbooks. After his first deal with the Soviets, he signed a massive deal with SNE, the Soviet National Oil Company, in 1975. The deal was for 4 million tons of crude oil to be sold to Trans World Oil over the course of a year. He rolled the deal over in 1976 and 77. However, the 1977 deal went wrong, well, if you're the Soviets. Deuss had paid $21.4 million for the first 6 shipments, but refused to pay $101.8 million for the remaining 33 deliveries, accusing SNE of failing to meet its obligations and responsibilities. A back-and-forth legal battle that went from Moscow to Bermuda to London eventually saw Deuss emerge the victor, with the Soviets essentially throwing in the towel after a legal battle that lasted over a decade. Deuss defeated the Soviets. But it wasn't just oil that captured Deuss's attention. He also had a keen interest in art and luxury goods. He became an avid collector of rare and valuable paintings, sculptures, and jewelry. His extravagant lifestyle saw him attending exclusive events, rubbing shoulders with the elite, and indulging in the finest things life had to offer. He owned 2 Gulfstream jets worth a sum of $52 million, a 180-foot 3-masted schooner, a luxury villa in Bermuda, and a castle in the Netherlands. By the end of the 1970s, Deuss was a global oil powerhouse, sometimes rivaling the major multinationals that had ruled the industry for decades. In part because, unlike them, Deuss was willing to get his hands a bit more dirty. In the 1980s, South Africa was under sanctions due to their institution of apartheid. But of course, they still needed oil, and they were willing to pay a premium to get it. Getting it to them was not so easy, as most of the world was participating in the embargo. There were watchful eyes everywhere. Luckily for Deuss, he had hired the perfect man for the job, former CIA Deputy Director Theodore G. Shackley. Yes, you heard that right, the former Deputy Director of the CIA and one of the masterminds of the Iran-Contra affair was on Deuss's payroll. At least until the mid-1980s, Shackley worked exclusively for Deuss, helping him to source fuel for tricky destinations like South Africa, all while obfuscating the entire route. While South Africa needed willing suppliers, Iran badly needed money to finance arms purchases for the war with Iraq, and was willing to be creative with ways of boosting exports of its crude oil. To get this done, Shackley and Deuss used several shell companies operated by Transworld directors, along with forged documents, fake destinations, ship-to-ship transfers on the high seas, fake ship flags, and other obfuscation methods that made it hard to trace shipments of the Middle Eastern crude oil on its winding route to South Africa. The scheme worked so well that it was estimated that at one point, Deuss supplied 20% of all of South Africa's crude oil and never got caught. However, he did later pay a price. In 1984, a British newspaper revealed that he had supplied over 60 million barrels to South Africa. 1 week later, a group called Pyromaniacs against South Africa firebombed his castle in Bergendal in the Netherlands. Luckily, no one was injured. Deuss, flush with fabulous profits from selling oil to South Africa at a healthy premium, began to expand his empire. In September of 1985, he paid $420 million for all of the U.S. East Coast assets of Atlantic Richfield Company, ARCO, which included 576 gas stations in Pennsylvania and New York, and a large oil refinery in Philadelphia. He rolled these assets into a new company called Atlantic Petroleum Company, APC. Deuss now owned 10% of all oil refining capacity on the U.S. East Coast. He then acquired British retailer Ultramar, further enlarging his empire with 1,000 service stations plus a large number of heating oil terminals. In the mid-80s, he also bought a 32% stake in Bermuda Commercial Bank, BCB, from Barclays. At this point, he was making estimated profits of $1 million per week, roughly $2.8 million in today's currency. By the late 80s, Deuss was a giant in the world of oil, and he felt it was time to really throw his weight around with one of his most grandiose maneuvers to date. He decided to corner the global crude oil market by buying an entire month's supply of Brent North Sea crude oil. Deriving its prominence from the large amounts of oil extracted from the Brent North Sea off the coast of Britain, this index is used to set the price of 2/3 of the world's oil. It is one of only 2 benchmarks used to set the global price. Deuss knew that if he bought the entire supply, he could drive up the price and then sell the cargo back on the market for a handsome profit. In April 1987, he executed his audacious plan, and it worked. John Deuss successfully cornered the oil market, netting him an extraordinary profit. For most people, pulling this off once would be enough risk and reward for a lifetime, but not him. He decided to do it again in January of 1988, but he wasn't so fortunate on his second attempt. At the time, the world was saturated with excess crude oil. Fearing tighter regulations from the British government, major oil firms started selling off at lower prices. Deuss was in a bad spot. He had an entire month's supply of Brent crude that he had partially financed with debt, quickly losing value. Fearing even greater losses, Deuss was forced to sell at a price significantly lower than what he had bought the supply for. The result was a massive $200 million loss, a present value of nearly $500 million. Likely due to this major setback, he was forced to sell Atlantic Petroleum Company in July of 1988, thereby relinquishing his gas station and refinery empire on the U.S. East Coast. Though down, Deuss was not yet out. Due to his impressive track record and major connections in the Middle East, the oil-rich Sultanate of Oman reached out to Deuss to help them create the Oman Oil Company, OOC, of which he later became president. In his time as president, he promoted projects worth over $10 billion, including a 1,130 kilometers long marine pipeline to supply natural gas from Oman to India that would run at depths of up to 3,500 meters. Kazakhstan also sought out Deuss's services for help in creating their national oil industry after the fall of the Soviet Union. Deuss and OOC became the first foreign investors in the Kazakh oil industry and enjoyed a privileged status in the country because of it. Deuss advised Kazakhstan to make the Tengiz deal with Chevron, which was the biggest oil deal of all time, valued at a colossal $230 billion. In 1992, Deuss and OOC helped align Kazakhstan, Russia, and Azerbaijan in an agreement for the Caspian Pipeline Company, CPC. The creation of this company was similar to that of OOC, in that its major purpose was to facilitate export routes for Kazakhstan. However, Chevron later pressured Kazakhstan to force Deuss and Oman out of the deal, arguing that their relatively smaller capital commitments did not entitle them to a share. In 1995, Deuss was also forced out of OOC after the death of Oman's former finance minister, Qais al-Zawawi, who was his strongest ally and advocate. Largely, Deuss's time at the top was coming to an end. As time went on, Deuss faced numerous legal battles and controversies. His involvement in offshore banking and allegations of money laundering brought him under the scrutiny of international authorities. He was accused of participating in a massive carousel fraud scheme via FCIB, the Bermudan bank he started back in the 70s. The scheme is essentially a method of exploiting the EU value-added tax rules to siphon off the tax rather than paying it to state authorities. After the investigation, it was found that 2,500 British citizens suspected of carousel fraud held accounts at Deuss's bank. In 2006, FCIB was forced to shut down. Deuss went on the run, but was found and arrested in Bermuda following an island-wide manhunt. He was later extradited to the Netherlands on charges of tax evasion and money laundering. He was found guilty of banking without a license and failing to report unusual transactions, and initially received a suspended prison sentence of 6 months. However, he was able to avoid jail time by paying a massive $47 million settlement. While some may view Deuss as a symbol of greed and corruption, others see him as a bold visionary who pushed the boundaries of what was possible. His willingness to take risks and challenge the status quo is an inspiration to those who dare to dream big. Despite the controversies surrounding his businesses, there is no denying that John Deuss made a significant impact on the world, and he may not be done yet. At 81 years old, Johannes Christian Martinus Augustinus Maria Deuss might still have a few more moves left on his chessboard.